I'm making this video to take you on a little behind the scenes of how I make some of my performance pieces. The show was called Wives with Knives. It was a Halloween show. So I listened to a bunch of music and finally landed on Billie Eilish's Copycat and sat for a long time thinking and decided that I was going to play a patient who escaped from a psych ward who had killed her husband and claimed she didn't do it. Not that you see much of that story in the performance, but that's the backstory that was playing in my head. Having a backstory or a character that I can play is really helpful for me when I'm performing because it helps me just really get into character and it makes me less nervous because I don't feel like I'm on stage. I feel like my character's on stage. That being said, I have been competing since I was a small child in gymnastics and performing for the majority of my life, like over 10 years. And I have yet to do a performance that I don't get nervous for. So that never really completely goes away. Doesn't mean it's not exciting and fun, but it still makes me nervous. All right, back to how I made this happen. So after I picked my music and I kind of picked my backstory and my character, I play the song and just kind of let myself move to the song. I might reference Instagram videos or YouTube videos of moves that I've seen or try to watch some cool stuff for inspiration, but for the most part, I just let myself move to the music. This is the part of my practice that I really don't want an audience for because a lot of the stuff that I come up with is silly and ridiculous, and I have to kind of have this space where I can just feel silly and not worry about what looks good and what doesn't, or what I want to keep or what I don't want to keep, or what moves I'm doing. I just need to be weird and just let whatever's coming out come out, and then I'll keep little bits and snippets of different pieces and then kind of mash them together to make a rough draft. Side note, a lot of people think that I would get more nervous performing in front of a large audience than a small one, but small audiences actually make me way more nervous because they feel more intimate and I feel like I know the people in the audience, or I can see the people in the audience. Where when you're performing on a big stage in front of thousands of people, it kind of dehumanizes the crowd in a weird way. So I do in fact get more nervous performing for smaller crowds, and most nervous when I'm performing for someone who knows me really well, especially if it's a one-on-one and I'm asking them to watch to give me feedback or to intentionally make me nervous. All right, back on track. So after I make this kind of mashup rough draft, I will run that several times, usually changing little things here and there, probably getting attached to one of my rough drafts and then realizing that I hate part of it and need to totally redo it. Another thing that happens to me often is I will look up really cool Instagram videos of really cool people doing really cool things and imagine that I will just be able to do those things and plan on putting them in my routine. And then once I practice doing the routine and try putting those moves in, I realize that I can't do that move. And now I need to come up with all new moves because I saved a bunch of moves that I can't do and thought those were all the things I was going to do. But I can't do those things. Now, if I have a lot of time to prepare, then sometimes I do get to throw some of that fun stuff in. But a lot of times I don't have a lot of time to prepare a performance piece. So I need to kind of work with what I've got and maybe have one or two moves that are like big goals that I'm trying to get for the performance. I get really bad OCD when it comes to practicing a piece. Like I have to practice it 10 bajillion times. Marking is when you either half do the move or in your head in your head you're just kind of imagining yourself doing it, so your body's doing these like little tiny movements or half quarter movements or whatever. Yeah, a lot of practice and rehearsal is that. You're just working on your memorization or practicing the moves in your head or just trying to get your body familiar with the patterns. It's fun to look back and watch some of these videos, and you're like so in character and you're just feeling it and vibing with yourself and just trying out little like, because I was trying to be crazy, so I was adding in so many like body spasm movements. It just cracks me up to watch the video, especially without sound. But it's all part of the creative process with a P and an R. I can enunciate, I swear. Also, lots of mistakes. Lots of standing around and cleaning the pole and stuff, which also I did not include, but lots of trying moves and messing it up and trying different moves and messing it up, and yeah, lots of that. I feel like what usually ends up happening is I have this really cool move that I want to learn, and I don't end up learning it, but I end up learning this different move that's a different version of the cool move I was trying to learn. That happens to me a lot, and I'm not really mad about it. It's a fun process. A big takeaway I got from gymnastics is that your movements read at about 50% on stage. Sometimes a little bit more on camera, just because you can play with angles and how close you're getting and all that. But your extension of your arms, your facial movements, how you're acting out, a character, all those things read a lot lower than you think they might when you're on a stage. So you really have to practice overacting, or I do. I practice overacting. And then on top of that, my comfort with how much I'm acting is also going to go down on stage. Time also feels different on stage. So when you're rehearsing, everything feels normal. You can hear your music super loud. It's easy to be patient with the moves. On stage, I always feel like I have to move faster than I do. When you're waiting in a pose or something like that, it feels like you're waiting there for an eternity, even though it's only been 2 seconds. There's also a lot of things that happen. Sometimes it's great. Sometimes you do get to rehearse on stage several times before a performance. But I've also done performances where I didn't get to rehearse on the stage, or where I only got one rehearsal. This particular show, I only got one rehearsal. And there's always things that you wouldn't have necessarily considered. So, for example, I kind of mapped out my piece for a little bit bigger of a stage, where the stage ended up being much smaller. So that changes things, obviously, which makes it tricky because, you memorize things in this particular way, and you kind of have to let yourself be okay also going with the flow. Like, you might be mid-routine and be like, oh, can't do that move, don't have room for that, so got to do something else. And what music cue do I just need to make sure to be on next? And also, for mapping out this show, I had to kind of figure out also warming up and cooling down, every time you want to practice, which can kind of be a pain because usually you're like, okay, this is my 100th time practicing, I just want to jump into it. But when you do that, it's big no-nos. It's big no-nos. You have to warm up. Another thing that takes a lot of time that you wouldn't think of is filming yourself and then going back and watching each rehearsal as well, because you go back and you watch it, from beginning to end, and then you're probably playing back parts where you're like, I don't like the way that looks, or why does that look weird, or this part doesn't match the music, or I want to change that. So even like little tiny routines that have pre-planning to them take a long time. And through this process, I've actually gotten a little bit better at improvising as well. And I have done some full improv performances as well, which is totally not my natural style. I love to have things planned out to a T, like every beat on the music, I know what I'm doing. But the improv has been really good for me, because that way, you know, if you do miss something or something doesn't go as planned, you can just go with the flow. It gives you that extra sense of comfort on stage where you're like, okay, well, I'm not just going to freeze up because I forgot my music. I'll be able to keep going. That is something that you learn very early on in piano and in gymnastics. So yeah, nice to be able to apply childhood life skills here as well. In case you haven't noticed, this is less of a tutorial or how to make a routine. I think that process could be a little different for everyone, and it's still a video that I could make someday. But this is just a behind the scenes brain dump. I've had a lot of people ask me about this process and who've been curious about it. So I figured I would just use footage of my million rehearsals from the last routine to kind of put a little brain dump together. Something that's interesting that I kind of found out through, you know, having done parkour performances for a long time, where you're using a lot of different obstacles, and then transitioning to something like pole, where you kind of have one piece of equipment that you're using. It's actually harder for me to memorize my routine on a pole, because there's not a lot of physical cues that cue you into the next move as far as your apparatus is concerned. When you have something, you know, like parkour, and you've got all these different pieces of equipment, your brain gets used to this pattern of using different equipment. So once you do a move on one piece of equipment, your brain kind of remembers, oh yeah, and then I go over there, and then, you know, I've only got a few moves that I need to remember that are associated with that piece of equipment. So it feels a lot easier to remember. Where with pole, you're just like, I'm still on the pole, and what's next? And then you've got all these different combos of moves that you're remembering. So it's an interesting thing to think about, but it was definitely harder for me to learn to memorize a pole routine compared to something like parkour. Someone asked me one time if competing and performing felt the same. And the answer for me is absolutely not. They feel completely different. Like, yes, you are doing a performance of sorts, you know, in both. One of them is around a lot of peers who are obviously you're competing against, and I think that situation is a lot more nerve-wracking. I started as a competitive gymnast when I was a kid, and so I went into parkour competitively. I competed for a very long time, and was lucky enough to get to compete in Red Bull Art of Motion a few times as well, and I loved competing while I was doing it. And I still, you know, now and then will do a competition for fun, but I think that I loved it because I didn't know what performing felt like. If I'm being honest, performing feels so much better. It's like everyone is rooting for you, and there's this I love being able to play something on stage, like a character or something. And I've done performances that aren't character based, you know, it's like you're just doing skills and tricks, and that's fun too. But I really like my favorite form of doing something in front of an audience is definitely like playing a character. I love acting, and I've loved it since I was a kid too. So that's kind of my way to blend those two worlds together. So yeah, the answer is no, they feel very different. And the adrenaline rush that I get for both of them is also very different. Yeah, and I prefer the one that I get with performance. So yeah, there's the answer to that. All right, that is pretty much it. This was just a mashup of a bunch of rehearsals and practices, and yeah, for preparations for look at me improving this audio. Preparations for the Wives with Knives show. So I hope you enjoyed seeing a little bit of behind the scenes. Okay, bye.